This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Hone, and it is Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, I'm continuing with a series of these that have looked at non-basic lands of various color identities. So far, I've looked at lands with colorless red, green, and white identities, and today we're looking at black. Before we get into talking about that though, I want to tell you about this video's special sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. You've surely heard of it because they seem to be sponsoring just about everyone on YouTube. It's an awesome fantasy RPG game where you do things like collect new champions and equipment and fight all kinds of cool monsters. You can play Raid on your mobile device or your PC, and you definitely should be if you're not, because it's a lot of fun. One of the things I enjoy the most about the game are the tournaments, where you compete against the entire Raid community, with whoever finds the most awesome artifacts in various dungeons, winning extra prizes. Right now, the tournament is for the Spider's Lair. There are also arena tournaments, with whoever wins the most PvP earning extra awards. If that all sounds awesome to you, head to the video description below and follow my special link. If you do, you'll start the game with 100,000 silver and this awesome champion, Hexweaver. Make sure to check your inbox in the game so you can get your special rewards. Again, go to the link in the description below and you'll get all of these awesome things if you're a new player to Raid Shadow Legends. Alright, so back to regularly scheduled programming. To be eligible for this list on the best black lands, a land had to have a black color identity. To have a black color identity, a land had to have only black mana symbols in its text box, either because it can tap for black mana, or it has an activated ability that costs black mana. I know this video is titled Black Lands, but that's because it is much more succinct than naming this Lands with Black Color Identities. All lands are in reality colorless, but I feel like this was a better name for the video. In all, there were 35 lands eligible for this list, and in this video we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Players Tour, or Mythic Championship Top 8, as well as a Legacy or Vintage Championship Top 8 is worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest Top 8 is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is Ifnir Deadlands. The Deadlands is part of a cycle of deserts from Hour of Devastation, all of which come into play untapped, can tap for colorless mana or for mana of a particular color if you pay 1 life. That means that the Deadlands does not come with the downside you frequently see on non-basic lands, since you can use it for mana right away. And once you throw in the fact that it can sacrifice deserts, including itself, to put -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creature, and you have a card that is mostly just an upgrade over a basic swamp. Your regular old swamp is not going to turn into a removal spell in the late game, but that's precisely what Ifnir Deadlands can do, and it can even do it repeatedly if you have extra deserts to feed it. It was played in a variety of different black decks in Standard, including Mono Black Zombies, Golgari Constrictor, and Rakdos Aggro. It doesn't have any points in Pioneer just yet, but it is being played a fair bit in that format, and I think that once it's safe to hold large events again, it will only be a matter of time before Ifnir Deadlands can add to its score in that format. At number 9, it is Barren Moor, a cycling land. We've seen cycling lands make most of these lists, and that's because they're really good. We've all been there. You're flooding out. You keep drawing land after land. How great would it be if one of those lands, you could just pay 1 mana and discard it to draw a new card? That's exactly what Barren Moor gives you. Sure, it comes into play tapped, but the upside makes that not such a big problem. So some decks, especially in Block and Standard, ran the Moor simply as a way to ensure themselves against flood. In Extended, Legacy, and Modern, the Moor has been used in decks featuring Life from the Loam, which specialize in loading the graveyard up with lands and then getting them back for value, and cycling lands are a pretty sweet thing to get back that way. Barren Moor was not initially legal in Modern, having been printed in Onslaught, but it got a reprint in Modern Horizons, and it started to see play there as a result. At number 8, it is Shizo, Death's Storehouse, part of the Kamigawa cycle of legendary lands that have activated abilities that can give a legendary creature some sort of bonus. In the case of Shizo, it can give fear to a legendary creature. One of the great things about this cycle, as I've already said in other videos, is that they come into play untapped and can tap for black mana right away. You don't even have to pay life for that mana, and as a result, the first copy of Shizo is effectively an upgrade over a basic swamp. It is legendary, so it can be a pain in multiples, but sometimes giving fear to a legendary creature can just win you a game. And as a result, black decks that have even one legendary creature should seriously consider playing this in any format. It was heavily played in Kamigawa block, which should not come as a surprise since it was a legendary creatures matter block. It also was played in Kamigawa Standard, which also had lots of legendary creatures. It also has a couple of points in Extended, where it could make Doron the Siege Tower unblockable. It doesn't have any points since 2008, and I think that's pretty strange, to be honest. I know there are certainly some downsides to non-basic lands, like suffering from Blood Moon, but it still feels like this should be getting played somewhere. At number 7, it is Dakmor Salvage, a land with one of Magic's most powerful mechanics ever, Dredge. Dredge makes it very easy to rapidly load up your graveyard, and it tends to kind of snowball, because the more you dredge, the more cards with Dredge go to your graveyard, and the more options you have of cards to get out of your graveyard on your draw step. The Salvage only has Dredge too, but it's pretty nice that if you really need a land, you can get this one back if you milled it. And yeah, it comes into play tapped, but that's fine. Salvage has been played in Dredge decks in both Modern and Vintage. At number 6, it is Vault of Whispers, part of the artifact land cycle from Mirrodin. This whole cycle ended up being ludicrously powerful. It may seem innocuous at first to tack on artifact as part of the card type on a bunch of lands, but this cycle had to be banned out of block, standard, and modern, so that should tell you something. The real problem was there were way too many powerful artifact payoffs, and by printing artifact lands, you are making it so that players can literally have a 60-card deck that is all artifacts, and their deck, including the lands, can all be artifacts or artifact payoffs. And that gets stupid powerful with things like the Affinity mechanic and other artifact payoffs like Cranial Plating and Arcbound Ravager. To make matters worse, these don't even come with a really notable downside. They come into play untapped and can tap for colored mana right away. In a technical sense, coming with the artifact type is also something of a downside since destroy artifact stuff can take them out, but the upside of the artifact type definitely outweighs the downsides. The Vault has been played in artifact heavy decks in block, standard, and extended. At number 5, it is Volrath's Stronghold. It can only add colorless mana, but it has an activated ability that costs black mana. Interestingly, this is the first card to make any of these lists that only has an activated ability that costs colored mana. Every land to make the first 4 of these lists could tap for colored mana too, but not the Stronghold. Anyway, the Stronghold's activated ability is pretty nice. It lets you put a creature from your graveyard on top of your library. That more than makes up for the fact that this can't produce black mana, as making sure you are drawing the best creature in your graveyard can be a real game changer. It was played in standard recurring survival decks, which were all about the graveyard. The deck would use recurring Nightmare and Survival of the Fittest together for all kinds of value, and by throwing the Stronghold in the mix, you even have a way to make sure you're going to draw a creature every turn to be used to tutor up something with the Survival. It was also played in extended Reanimator decks, but also in a lot of other decks that had some black mana, just as a way to get some value out of the graveyard, with The Rock, a black-green mid-range deck, being the most frequent home for it in the format. More recently, it's been played in Legacy Alurin decks. This is a deck that generally tries to win using creature-based combos, and the Stronghold can help you get back pieces of the combo that your opponent might have destroyed. It doesn't have any points since 2018, but the Stronghold is a pretty nice land, and it wouldn't be surprising for it to put up points at Legacy events in the future. At number 4, it is Castle Locthwain, which, despite being the newest card to make the list, also has an impressive 41 points. If you're playing a deck with a bunch of swamps, the castle will basically never come into play tapped, so it doesn't have to make up for the downside of coming into play tapped quite as much as some non-basic lands. The castle can tap for black mana right away in most cases, and also sports a fairly powerful activated ability. It can draw you cards at the cost of some of your life. That is one of black's most powerful abilities, and it's really nice to have it on a land that has very little downside. There aren't a whole lot of lands out there that can be card advantage engines, but that's exactly what Castle Locthwain can be. While it may not provide flood insurance in the same way as a cycling land, it makes sure that if you have drawn a bunch of extra lands, you can at least do something with the ability. It's been played a lot in Standard in just about all the black decks, and that's going to continue. It also has 10 points in Pioneer, where it's been played in all the black decks, namely Dimir Inverter, Mono Black Aggro, and Mono Black Vampires. It'll be interesting to see where the castle ultimately ends up. Right now, I would not be surprised to see it at number 2 in a year or so. At number 3, it is Arguel's Bloodfast, which has some similarities to Castle Locthwain. The fast can also pay some mana and life to draw cards, which is, again, a really strong thing for black. However, there are some key differences between these two cards as well, like the fact that the Bloodfast isn't even a land at first. Once your life total drops enough, either from drawing a bunch of cards or being beaten down by your opponent, it transforms into Temple of Aklazotz, a land that can tap for black mana, and it can also sacrifice creatures and gain you back some life, something you might really be in need of after fasting too long. The two sides synergize well together, as you can be pretty reckless with the fast when you know you'll be getting back some of that life after it transforms. During its time in Standard, the fast was played primarily in aggro decks. One of the biggest problems for aggro decks can be running out of gas against an opponent who makes a game go too long. As a result, lots of aggro decks in Standard ran Bloodfast in the sideboard, as it gave them a way to make sure that they could keep pressuring the opponent thanks to all the extra cards. The fast also has a single Pro Tour top 8 in Pioneer, where it was played in a Dimir Inverter deck. While it is likely to continue to gain points in that format in the future, I think it's inevitable that Arguel's Bloodfast will be overtaken on this list by Locthwain. Locthwain is still in Standard and also being played more in Pioneer. And number 2, it is Bojuka Bog. It's part of a cycle of common lands from Worldwake that enter the battlefield tapped, can tap for a color of mana, and have a color-appropriate enter the battlefield ability. In the case of the Bog, it exiles a graveyard. That effect might be useless against a decent chunk of most metas, but against the right opponents, like those seeking to do graveyard shenanigans, it can be incredibly powerful. And incredibly powerful for 0 mana is a pretty great deal, and it also can't be countered most of the time. It wasn't played at all in Block, and has only 1 point in Standard. That's because those formats did not really have graveyard decks, but in formats that do have that type of deck, the Bog has done well. This is especially true in Legacy. Bojuka Bog is going to continue to gain points going forward, but I could still see Locthwain eventually overtaking it. And at number 1, it is Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Okay, so in a very technical sense, Urborg should not have qualified for this list. That is because, believe it or not, it does not technically have a black color identity. This is because it doesn't have black mana anywhere in its text box. However, this is a spirit of the rules versus the letter of the rules decision here. Sure, it doesn't technically have a black color identity, but I feel like this card deserves to be here anyway. It turns all lands, including itself, into swamps, and thus it can tap for black mana right away. Seems pretty black to me to turn all the lands on the table into swamps too. Anyway, let's talk about the card itself. As I said, it's another non-basic land that is in many ways just a better swamp. This is because it makes it so that all your lands can add black mana, and if you're in a deck that isn't mono-black, this basically provides some additional fixing for you. Now, the effect is symmetrical, so you'll also be making it so your opponent's lands can tap for black, and sometimes that will help them out, but you will usually be able to benefit from it more. This has made it so that Urborg has been played in pretty much all formats in multicolor decks that feature black, and that's what has led to its massive score, which is continuing to rise in Legacy and Pioneer. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the over 270 other MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.